Okie doke. So I'm showing that we're right at noon. So go ahead and get started. I'll start off to see if anybody's got any specific questions before I jump into some of the regulatory information I have. Bill, you got any questions from out in the field?
Well, we're troubleshooting these 2 lithium battery packs, and we think there is a switch that wakes them up, but it's obscured, so we're going to try that. And then I have to interface to a Schneider electric charge controller 8600, and I'm a little bit nervous about you know, turning it on just because I'm not familiar with the Schneider equipment. I've been watching videos as best I can. You know, I don't want to let the smoke out, as they say.
Yeah.
But I think it's appropriate to say that I can start up the battery charge controller panel thing and then work on the inverter later on down the line. That is at another weekend or something like that.
You mean add the inverter in later?
Yeah, it's all connected, but I'm you know, I do have a question. Come to think of it, within the charge controller, I could probably show my desktop. There's 2 1-amp fuses, and they have to do with ground. What is it? Ground. Oh gosh, I could probably show you.
Like a ground fault? Are you saying?
Yeah, it's a ground fault. Let me actually bring up a picture. Yeah, I got it right here. I can share my desktop.
Sure.
Start share. So this is where the PV comes in. Well, actually, the PV and the battery come into the charge controller. There's 2 strings of PV, and the battery is on the left side. And you see up top, there's 2 fuse holders. We tested the left fuse and it was open. And we thought, oh, we blew a fuse, but it turns out that you use one fuse of the other, and I'll zoom in if I can, and it says, oh, come on. I can't zoom in because, yeah, okay, there we go. You see, it says negative ground PV and positive ground PV, and I don't, as again, the one on the left was a fuse that was blown. Schneider says most all PV systems are negative ground.
Yeah.
However, given that the fuse on the right is still good, I'm wondering whether this is a positive ground system. And I don't really, you know, I don't really kind of understand what that means. I wonder whether someone on this call might have some input.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why you would have a fuse in your grounding system, because
and these are only 1-amp fuses.
Yeah, well, clearly they're designed to blow as soon as there's any electricity into that system. But your ground should never have any electricity flowing through it unless,
well, when you, okay,
unless there's a fault.
So you're saying ground is not in the negative PV wire, but it's just a random number 6 copper, bare copper going to a ground rod that goes into the ground.
Well, there's 2 different systems here. Of course, you have your grounding and bonding that's designed to connect all metallic components in your system together. That's the bonding part. And then that leads to a ground rod usually. And that's to bleed off any stray electricity that could be caused from an outside source, like a power line that falls on your system, or lightning strike, or a short circuit, or anything like that. That's kind of the
panel. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as it's shorting to the metallic component that's not designed to carry current. But your wires are designed to carry current, and they can also carry a short circuit current. So most of your wiring system, if there is a ground fault or something that would be bled off the ground, that wire is connected usually within the inverter, but it looks like here it's within the charge controller
Yep.
to your grounding system. That's where they refer to it as a negative grounded system or a positive grounded system. In Europe, they typically connect their wiring system to the grounding system through the positive wire. But in the US, we typically connect it through the negative, which is why they would have two different ones here, it looks like, because then it could be sold overseas or domestically, whichever.
Right.
So, but it's designed to carry unwanted current. So if you've got a fault, if you've got a fuse, now you're going to open up that circuit and not carry that unwanted current. So I'm not quite sure in my own mind why there would be a fuse there. It could just be to isolate the ground, the charge controller in case there's a ground fault going through the wiring system. And then there would be an indicator light in there to say there's a ground fault.
Okay.
So,
let me ask this. I'm going to trace the PV wires and see whether the PV plus somehow is connected to a ground. And I'm not sure what that would be. I'll be honest with you. You know, whether there's a ground rod or just a extraneous screw somewhere that says ground on it. Just for my own edification. Anyway, that's
yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to completely understand.
Yeah, and unless we see the entire system, you're right. You know, we're just kind of going by the little snapshot here. But
Yeah.
I mean, did you try just replacing the fuse or switching the fuse over and see if it works?
No, I actually listened to some YouTube videos from Schneider, and they said one or the other, but not both. And as you said, they said most of the U.S. systems are negatively ground. The negative is grounded, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll
And that's one of the reasons why you don't put an interrupt into the negative wire. You would only interrupt the positive leg of the circuit with a switch or a fuse. So logically, if this is negatively grounded, I would think that the way it is right now with the fuse removed, well, no, that wouldn't work because now you've got an open circuit. Yeah.
Well, there was, like I said, a blown fuse on the one that's vacant right now. And
Yeah.
I will confirm that the PV on the outside of the container, this is a 40-foot container, goes through a positively, with a breaker in the positive leg of the PV.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense because that's just going to act like a disconnect, right? And a overcurrent protection.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's a question to protect the electronics. I'm a little confused on what the point of a fuse in the overcurrent protect or in the grounding system. It may be something that we're just reading that label and reading something into it. You know, I'd have to look at it a little bit closer, but I'm not familiar with that particular product either.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, and it's so hard to find technical support for Schneider. They don't have a presence in Houston. And I'm still looking for technical support in that area.
Yeah. Okay, sometimes you can get an old service manual on eBay or something, you know, just look in there, find somebody selling off some old document. Okay, did anyone else have any questions here? Something bothering you out there? I mean, Don, other than your political aspirations or whatever?
No, I was going to ask you, have you ever heard of the Ambry batteries?
Ambry?
Yeah, the company, they do solid metal batteries. I was looking at some stuff about that last night. I thought it was pretty interesting. They're industrial level or, you know, utility level batteries that they're proposing to put out there.
Oh.
And I've seen the MIT professor who came up with the idea, I've forgotten his name, speak in Houston. And It
Okay.
showed promise, but I don't know where it's at right now.
I was watching something last night that was, I think about a month or two old, and they said they're looking to start putting them in place now, but I don't think they've placed any yet. But the idea, Jay, was that they were industrial sized batteries. I think they had to keep them at like something very high, like 600 degrees Celsius. But when he
Oh,
went through he kind of went through the process. It had, I think, calcium at the top and anatoly or something down at the bottom or something like that, and then a salt in the middle as the membrane.
are these the
And
liquid metal,
yeah,
batteries? Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah. I saw a YouTube video or something on
Yeah.
that. And
And
my
it's-
only impression was, oh, that's cool. You know, that's
yeah.
like,
That's what I thought too. I didn't know if you do any more about it than that, but they talked about using them for industrial. As far as if you're a utility and you've got 100 wind turbines out there, this is a way to kind of get around the lithium ion 10,000 AA batteries stuck together to try and
Sure.
hold it for.
Yeah, Google Donald Sadoway on YouTube. He's the
That's his name.
MIT professor, and he gives a great talk, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, I was very impressive. I saw him just on TV, or online, but yeah.
I would think when we're talking about utility scale battery systems, the one that makes the most sense to me, shows the most promise, are the flow batteries. They just seem to have the best economics involved
Are they-
in
Are you
them.
talking about water, or are you talking about the airflow ones then? Like the
No,
liquid
they're
air ones?
flow. They just referred to as flow batteries.
Okay.
They use, I don't remember what the electrolyte solution is. There are two different tanks for
Mhm.
the anode and the cathode, but
Mhm.
essentially they're entirely scalable. So you keep the electronics at one level, and then you hook these things up to massive tanks, and the
Okay.
battery can be scaled up to whatever size without a huge cost, incremental cost, because you're really just increasing the size of the tank. And
Okay.
so when you talk about city size or campus size storage capacity, the flow battery just seemed to be very scalable.
Okay.
Without the heavy cost of infrastructure. It's an
And-
industrial scale thing. It's not going to work for your residential PV, but if you wanted to power a city, yeah, that might work. I still think backing up with your electric vehicles is a better solution ultimately, because
Mhm.
then you don't have to pay for any of the infrastructure. It's all there already.
Yeah, but the utility can't rely on everybody saying, yes, I'm going to go buy an electric vehicle, and yes, I will plug it in and do everything I'm supposed to, and I won't let my infrastructure deteriorate.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Probably that would be the best if everybody did what they're supposed to. But look at the grocery store. Not all the carts make it into that little cart holder. People
Yeah,
don't do
well,
what they're told.
and speaking of that, I just saw where the utilities motivation, and this is something that was new to me. I didn't realize that most of the utilities profits are in capital investment, the recovery of their capital investment, not in the selling of power. So when they build a power plant, their arrangement with the Public Utilities Commission is to get a certain percentage back in profit on that investment. And that's where most of their profits come from. So they have a massive incentive to build very large infrastructure projects that they can then recover their capital investment plus. So those flow battery type things, right in their wheelhouse, because they've got a big incentive to own the infrastructure that's associated with the grid. Whereas automobiles, EVs, that's a little bit more like, I don't know, social media kind of thing. Nobody really owns the infrastructure. So I think we have competing motivations that are going on. So.
Are there any that have been installed that you know of, the flow batteries?
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of them out there. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fairly common and fairly tried and true technology. So that's another reason why, it's probably going to be adopted pretty quickly. The liquid metal one sounds pretty neat, but again, it's experimental. So it may prove to be the next big thing, or it may prove to be nothing, I don't know.
I believe that the tracker manufacturer Next Tracker has integrated flow batteries into their systems.
Yeah, that would make sense because they're a big utility scale, provider. So,
Right.
all right.
I
Anybody?
think maybe with this whole self-driving car revolution, these self-driving cars could be programmed to plug in when there is a lower demand.
Yeah, I've got this vision of the public transport system of the future where there are self-driving electric vehicles and a series of wireless charging stations in the form of a parking space. You know, when the vehicle drives in, parks in this space, then through the bottom of the vehicle, it charges and discharges electricity so that these vehicles, when they're idle, are either charging or discharging as need may be. And that the vehicle just becomes an app on your phone where on your phone, you log in and you say, I need a ride to the airport or whatever. A self-dispatched vehicle, you can choose either I want the ride all by myself or I want to share it, for a cheaper price. When it shows up, you wave your phone in front of the door opens up, you get in, and away you go. I mean, that seems a more logical mass transit system, or at least the United States, since we don't have city centers. We don't have, our whole infrastructure is not based around like the European model of you've got city centers and then you can connect to those city centers and then you've got a localized distribution. We're just a nation of cars, so why not incorporate the car into our mass transit world?
Jay, you think people are going to give up their, except for New York City and Chicago and LA, maybe? No, not LA. I take that back.
Yeah.
Except for Chicago and New York City, where people take cabs anyway. Do you think people are really going to give up their cars to get a generic? I'll pick up I'll come pick me up. I mean,
Yeah, I think so. I think not our generation, not you and me, but
okay. Just
like
make sure I'm not. Yeah.
my granddaughter, she has no desire to ever own a car.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that, Jay. Across everybody I talk to, it's the older generation not giving it up. I'm not going to go to an autonomous car, but the younger generation, driver's license, no way.
Yeah.
I've got one daughter like that, but we keep asking her why she hasn't got her license yet. Even her sisters ask her that. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, our granddaughter is just getting a new job and she's like saying, well, I need to go over here. Well, she doesn't have a car, and we keep saying, we'll help you buy a car. And she's like, well, it's only $5 by Uber to get over there. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't have a car. And she goes, I don't want a car. I got no place to park it. I don't want to drive. It's $5, and it's a lot of $5 to make a car payment and an insurance payment. So,
Is she in a city?
Yeah, a little. It's not a major city, but it's a city, but I don't quite understand it, but I don't understand tattoos either. So you know what? It's not my world. It's not my world anymore.
Good point. If they're not sailors, they shouldn't have tattoos, but that's a whole other conversation.
I always think of the line from MASH where he says, why would you hang a piece of art on your body that you wouldn't hang on your wall? It's like, and that just sort of is in my brain. But you know what? That things change. These kids are always walking on my lawn. So it's a different world, and I think we need to adjust to that and adjust our thinking outside of what we personally might find attractive, and look at. Okay. Anybody else have a solar question before I jump into some of the regulations that I was finding? It seemed like this week when I was looking at updated news, there was a sort of a theme of regulations, regulatory things happening. The one that I think, of course, has the most legs as far as our industry is apparently there's a big movement to extend the investment tax credit to 10 years, extended by 10 years. And there's been 100+ organizations petitioning the federal government, including SEIA and those kinds. And also to extend it from tax credit to direct payment as well. So if you do not have the tax refund or tax liability, you would get a refund, on the 26%. So money
There's been a
back in your
general-
pocket.
Yeah, there's been a general push for that, and I think I've even seen one that suggested making it
Whoop, you broke up.
permanent check there. I said, I think there's even been one that I've seen where they suggested making the tax credit permanent, but that's, again, that's a bill, so it doesn't mean that it's gonna go anywhere necessarily. They've also suggested increasing the rebates for electric vehicles, increasing and extending them too. There's
Oh.
lots of proposals out there that are kind of.
Yeah, I think, again, in my own mind, making the investment tax credit permanent is not a good idea, because these things are supposed to be temporary incentives, and the marketplace ends or changes and morphs. So it becomes almost like it's not a good idea. The same reason fossil fuel subsidies that have gone on for 100 years are not a good idea, because they last beyond their reasonable period of time.
Again, you gotta define what a subsidy is, because nobody's still defined a fossil fuel subsidy for me other than that fossil fuel subsidy.
Fossil fuel subsidies. Well, and one of the problems, of course, has to do with, the fossil fuel subsidies are a lot more complicated than just saying you get 26% back. There are things like preferential treatment on federal land leases. There are things like subsidies to transportation or right-of-way for pipelines, a lot of those kind of things. Accelerated depreciation on the investment in infrastructure.
Everybody gets that.
I know, but and there is another one that's still in effect since the Truman administration, where the nationalized oil fields, when Saudi Arabia nationalized all the oil fields, those companies that owned those original leases are still being paid as if they own them by the federal government, because the US government didn't want to get into a war defending these oil leases. So we're still paying them as if they owned internationally appropriated assets, so there's a lot of international tax benefits and things of that nature. So
hey, Jay, so
Yeah.
I can come in with some very specific examples.
all right.
And so one is the intangible drilling cost deduction, which is tax code 26 or US code 26 subsection 236, and that is for $13 billion over the course of the next 10 years that got appropriated in the joints in 2017 budget.
But again, intangible drilling costs are always deductible. It's just a matter of the time period over which they're deductible, because typically intangibles are deductible over 15 years unless if they're not self-created. So I mean,
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, but it's more of a timing than an ultimate benefit.
So yeah, like Jay was mentioning, you're definitely right. Indirect subsidies, again, in the 26 US tax code, last in, first out accounting that they get.
Everybody gets that.
Are you sure about that one?
Positive. I'm a tax attorney. A former tax attorney.
Okay.
Hey,
All right, Don.
Are you really?
Don,
Cool.
I will jump in with the tax subsidy of the American military securing oil fields in the Middle East.
That's not taxes.
Oh, that's a subsidy, buddy.
There are some you could point to that people would say, like depletion. Now you could argue back and forth about whether depletion is an appropriate way to recover costs. But a lot of the things I don't disagree that there's a lot of subsidies out there, but when they say some things like in the tax code we have to clean up all these fossil fuel subsidies, they're not really. I mean, then you're taking out normal tax provisions. When you start saying people, because of their industry, don't get normal tax provisions, that's kind of that's a backward way. That's taking away.
Well,
Well,
it's
how-
unfair that the oil companies have the best accountants. So I think we should
I
move
can't-
them all to the solar industry.
Oil companies, rich people, Bill Gates, you're going to say that he's not allowed to have an
That's right.
accountant? I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
So
I
Don-
would, I'll just jump back. I'm going to cut you off there, Chris, because Don
Okay.
is not going to give this up.
Well,
But
actually, I had a real quick question for him on that.
uh-huh.
How would you say, Don, because I get students that ask me this,
Yep.
are there anything that would substantiate oil or credits or some preferential treatment? Is there anything there that you could tangibly say?
The only one that I would say, going through them, that I would say is specifically a preference or something extra that that's not standard, is depletion. Now,
Okay.
depletion, there's some situations where you get more than 100% depletion.
Okay.
I would look at that if I were, and again, you can argue back and forth because a lot of it is like you could get less than 100% or you could get more than 100% depending on how you did the estimates. That's the only one that I can think of that is, oil/extraction, coal relevant.
Okay.
But
Well,
a lot of the other
I'd throw in there the less than market rate leases on federal properties.
and again, that could be a subsidy, just not a tax sub. I'm kind
Yeah.
of focused on the tax one just because that's
Right.
the part
Okay.
that I know.
Well, let's
I didn't mean to-
jump back to the
Convert.
ITC,
Yeah.
the investment tax credit. I just think the direct payment thing, even though that gets thrown in, is a big hairy deal. Because imagine all of the people, corporate and individual, who do not have tax liability, who this opens up. Basically, it's a 26% refund on your installation.
And
And-
Jay, this eliminates an industry because there's a whole group of people out there, like back in the 90s where they used to have the wind farms out in Arizona.
Yeah.
People who put them in place couldn't use the tax credit, so they wouldn't got investors. And then
Sure.
the investors, there's cost of attorneys and a lot of other people. It was very expensive to do it, but people did it. And this is an excellent way to just put the money directly into people's hands, I think.
Well, imagine all the schools, all of the churches, these people who do not pay taxes
Yep.
suddenly can invest
Bill-
and put a system in
Yeah, Bill's people
and
were
get
talking
money
about a
back.
couple weeks ago. He was talking. Remember you were talking. Bill Swan was talking about the I think it was a church you were working with that couldn't use the credits.
Yeah.
Perfect example.
Yeah, and I know, Jay, you were working with a church too there.
Yeah.
There's on the negative side, I mean, that's a positive thing. The negative side, apparently there's been a recent study that has found, or an investigation has found, that many utilities around the country are working together. And I'm not saying this like it's an illegal collusion kind of thing. They're coordinating their efforts to try and eliminate or neuter net metering laws. So this is a coordinated effort. And we've talked about this before in previous calls about, the Gandhi quote about first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. This is the attack mode. It's like, we want to get rid of net metering. So specifically they're targeting at the moment Ohio, Florida, Illinois, California, Kansas, and South Carolina. They're looking to eliminate net metering where they can, but it's usually a little more subtle than that. The bill that was just killed in California, it was called AB 1139, looked to shift, instead of paying full retail on your net metering, they wanted to pay wholesale on generation only, which is significant. It essentially took in California, the average is around 20 cents or so per kilowatt hour, which is what they were paying for net metered power. It would reduce it down to about 3 cents. So that pretty much gets rid of the net metering incentive. If you get those. There's also a move towards a lot more fixed charges associated with people who have solar systems. I see that with my own co-op that I'm connected with. because co-ops are outside of the net metering legislation anyway. They can do whatever they want to do. Our co-op has opted now. If you don't have solar, your fixed fee is $12 a month to connect up to the grid. If you do have solar, it's $42 a month. So that is a bite, you know.
Jay, I mean, is it net metering itself, or is it a bigger issue if we have to redo the way that we're doing our utility reimbursement? Because you still have to have the utilities being reimbursed. There's always going to be people who don't have, you're going to turn them into the post office. You're going to give the good stuff to FedEx and to UPS.
Right.
And utilities is trying to avoid being the post office who's going to get screwed in the end, which, we can talk about different ways to do it. But I think that your point is good, that net metering is cutting away a lot of the incentive for people. But isn't it a bigger issue that we really need to figure out? How do you talk about this sometimes, we need to have a new paradigm on how we do the reimbursement for our power in general.
Yeah, I've even discussed with our local utility on this fixed fee. And my argument with them is is an acknowledgement. You guys have costs associated with providing me this infrastructure. And I get benefits being able to tie into this infrastructure. I would just ask that there be some sort of parity between the two, that the charges are not punitive in intent, that they're simply there to recover the actual costs plus a profit, because they have to make a profit. So really, is $40 the right number, or $42? I don't know. I kind of have to trust them. If it's $150, well, that strikes me as pretty punitive. And that's just a motivation for no one to sign up for solar. Some utilities are going to behave, properly. Others, like First Energy, they've demonstrated they never behave properly. They will do the wrong thing always. So I don't know. This is where legislation comes in, and then you got to trust government, which is a whole nother problem. And You've got to deal with, do you want to deal with crooked politicians or crooked utility administrators, which then tends to, in my mind, push everybody into an alternate, system. And I think that's part of what's going to be the result, the unintended consequence of trying to stop a mega trend that is going to happen. People are going to transition to solar because it is economically beneficial for them to transition to solar. If the utilities try and make it difficult, then they're going to just put themselves out of the business of being the infrastructure provider. Somebody else, some other mechanism, whether it's a microgrid, for example, where I can isolate myself from the utility as much as possible, whether it's the integration of battery backup into pretty much every residential system so that the home can isolate itself from the utility grid. All of these things are going to begin to happen. And we've talked about, like, if Apple bought access to the grid and allowed the net metering to go through a blockchain based marketplace so that net metering becomes irrelevant, where I can sell my excess power to Apple and Apple can sell that excess power to Don or to Chris or whoever. That gets rid of the whole worry about, are they paying me retail or are they paying me wholesale? You're gonna
have to explain blockchain at some point too, just to make sure we, at least some of us, understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'd have to understand it 100% myself before I can explain it, but it's basically the market derived accounting mechanism for these kind of.
That's what I think. Yeah, it's some way to track the payments, but I don't understand enough of it. But yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing they use with Bitcoin and stuff on setting a price. Yeah, Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Dan Lipinski. I may have met him, and he may have had something to do with the development of the in-phase microinverters. And he is muted. I may have met him in Houston. He had a solar trailer. Is that true, Dan, or is this a different Dan?
Yeah, he's still muted, so he may.
Yeah.
We'll give him a second to answer otherwise. So All right. He probably walked out to get a sandwich as soon as you decided to call on him. And he's hidden in the background. So I'll keep going on with a couple of these things. Oh, one other interesting thing that in these articles with the utilities is they're beginning to shift a number of the costs within the utility bills to transmission. And apparently this is a trend, which I'm not quite sure, you know, because essentially when you get your bill, you're paying for generation, you're paying for transmission, which is essentially from the central generating facility to the local distribution system, which may be a different company. Like if you're with AEP or somebody like that, the transmission company may be a whole different company that they're buying services from. And then there's the local distribution system. So those are usually the three elements that are incorporated within your bill, plus all of the Save the Hooted Owl add-ons and things like that that they throw on utility bills. But in this case, if they're beginning to shift costs, then that to me signals something that's up. You know, maybe it's towards their infrastructure thing. Jay, did you have a comment?
Are all three of those categories based on usage, or are any of those flat fees just for being hooked up?
Most of them are based per kilowatt hour in most utilities. I don't want to say in all, but I think that's generally the case. You get a certain cost per kilowatt hour consumption for distribution, for transportation, or for transmission, and of course for generation. And in the early days of deregulation, you could then choose to buy your generation from another third party, which is allocated on your bill. But you haven't really had the chance or the choice of choosing your distribution company or your transmission company. So now there are some fixed fees in there, you know, that are also added in. So good example, I know Duke Energy lost a lawsuit. So they have a refund, a fixed fee refund that usually appears on their bills, things like that. And there's a whole bunch of others. Sometimes they're local in nature, sometimes they're state in nature, sometimes they're utility based. It's sort of like when First Energy was trying to get an add-on fee to subsidize the cost of their nuclear power facility. That would have been another fee that appears on the utility bill. And the Ohio State Legislature said, we're not only going to put that on First Energy customers, but on every customer from every utility in the state of Ohio, which was part of the whole controversy that led to a number of people being indicted for taking money. Let's see, Texas, I was gonna give Bill a shout out in Texas. Texas defeated Senate Bill 3, which apparently was a bill that went before the legislature that essentially cast all blame for the unreliable power in Texas to solar, and required them to put reliability safeguards within their system, even though it was 90% coal and natural gas that caused the problems, and that got defeated. So that's a good thing. There was also some information about the governor signing something on decommissioning of solar panels, although the articles I read never really told me what it was, but apparently as a solar advocate, I'm supposed to be happy about it. So they claimed it was a good thing, but in the wonderful world of journalistic reporting, they didn't bother to tell me why it was a good thing. So I would have loved to know. Illinois, the governor has a carbon-free by 2045 plan that he's just thrown out there. That again sounds like political happy talk because it's far enough in the future not to affect anybody who is currently in office. And there were like no specifics to tell me why I should be happy about it. I know, Chris, you're in Illinois, right? Anything you know, or is it political happy talk?
Well, it's you were talking about net metering, and what I'm finding is there's a lot of dynamics every state and all the politicians are playing, and you're covering a lot of it. And the only reason I say that is in Illinois, we get 40% of our energy from about 6 nuclear plants throughout the state. Well, they're hemorrhaging money pretty extensively. So they've received a bailout a few years ago, and then they had a massive, there was a massive fraud that they perpetrated where they were trying to buy one of the state senator or state representatives to act on other things, which has caused an uproar. It's Illinois, so none of this is really a surprise. But the moral of the beast is there are a lot of different bedfellows that are playing out on this whole thing. And it's interesting because the solar industry has come to a standstill because there's really no more funding in the FEJA Act to supply money to do these solar installs. So they're waiting for this Energy Act to come back into play so they can get back to work. Well, the Commonwealth Edison, the large power utility, is saying, well, unless we get some sort of additional subsidy to keep these other power plants open, we're not in favor of it. And so one of the bigger questions is, as a society, do we question whether should we maintain these nuke plants, even though they do cost some additional funds, but produce 0 CO2 emissions, or do we let free market play, let these things go down, and then go with other alternative fuels? So it's interesting. And in the state of Florida, they're trying to be the power companies are the ones that are really pushing the renewables, but they are the only ones that can install them and run them and maintain them, and not on a customer per se. So it's just interesting, and that's kind of what we're hearing here.
Yeah, I think we're in that transition, as you just point out. The utilities were always against solar. They were saying solar's bad, solar's bad. Now they're in the mode of solar's good as long as we're the only ones who own it, maintain it, and control it. And and that's not wholly unexpected. With nuclear, I always look at it like riding the back of a tiger. Once you're on it, you can't get off, because the decommissioning of a nuclear power plant is more expensive than building it in the first place. So how do you deal with that? And that's not an easy problem. I mean, it would be easy to just be anti-nuclear and say nuclear's bad. We need to do away with it. But it's harder to be practical and say, okay, how? Because it is 20% of our electrical grid. It is in fact non-polluting. It is in fact really expensive to get rid of. And we have no plan for dealing with the spent fuel. So all of those things are bad. Although the reality is, if tomorrow there's a nuclear accident somewhere, which there will be, at some point, there's going to be a cry. We're going to have to deal with that. And we're always better at responding to a disaster than saying, look, there's going to be a disaster. Let's fix it before it is a disaster. So, and then of course, there will be the people beating their chest saying, how could we have ever envisioned this thing would happen, when any one of us sitting here today we know for a fact it's going to happen. We just don't know when, because anything built by mankind breaks eventually, so.
But
so
Jay, if you watch renewable videos on YouTube, there's a 5-minute commercial on nuclear power that it pops in there that you have to watch before you can go to the next one. And they'll explain to you that all the stuff you talked about is okay.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. If it's on YouTube, it must be right. I'm willing to buy it. I'm willing to acknowledge these problems are difficult, and I hope that there are common sense people on all sides of these issues: fossil fuel industry, nuclear industry, renewable industry. All of these things. We are in a megatrend transition towards renewables. I think that's undeniable. We're in a megatrend transition away from fossil fuels for a lot of reasons. It's not economically supportive, and it is a diminishing resource. So whether that's 5 years or 500 years, it is a trend that will continue, and we need to work ourselves through that process. So let's not I mean, I find it annoying when people just say, this is the answer, this is right, this is wrong, because as soon as someone says, I know the truth, you know that they're either stupid or they're lying, you know, so. Okay, oh, my last one I found here was in Virginia. Virginia apparently had a provision that prohibited schools and local governments from net metering or entering into power purchase agreements. So that is being done away with or has been done away with. So that's a nice movement to where now these nonprofit governmental or school bodies can get the same benefits that most states already enjoy. But so we're seeing it pop up in different places. Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, one of my pet peeves are something in Houston, the high voltage transmission lines are controlled by CenterPoint. And I once looked on Google Maps to see how much area that occupies. And I'm probably correct in saying that there's enough land area to put a gigawatt of solar. And I was wondering whether any of the participants here today live in large cities and there's any movement toward thinking about putting grid on the high voltage easements. You know, presumably the infrastructure is always there to export the power, and maybe community solar would be the operational word. Anyway, anybody have any comments on that?
Yeah, Bruce Huber here. Hey, Municipal Authority of Westmoreland County just built I think it's a 1 meg array right off of Interstate 70. And this is a municipal authority, supposedly to run their sewage plant, but it's across the interstate from a new gas plant. So they have a microgrid, I guess, in construction there.
Well, I think, Bill, your point, in fact, the utility was coming through trimming trees along our power lines in our neighborhood. And I think I heard them say they've got like a 50-foot easement on either side of the high transmission lines, because they were talking about basically clear cutting everything. Well, that would be a 100-foot swath under all of these things. And I think your point is good that that's a lot of land. You could put a large strip of solar and tie directly into these high power transmission lines. You know, when people say there isn't enough land or space, well, you know, already those high transmission lines are not exactly the most attractive thing in the country. And if you're going to stick some solar somewhere, why not stick them where it's already a bit ugly, you know?
That makes sense. That makes sense, Jay, but would they, I mean, legally, do they have a right to do that right now? If they have an easement, it's typically for a purpose, and it would typically be for the transmission lines, whoever municipality would have to grant them a new authority to do something different, wouldn't they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, those utility lines don't necessarily go through cities. I mean, they do eventually in some places, but it's really all out there in the countryside. And I don't know ownership issues. I mean, if they can come down and hack every single tree and remove every structure that's within 100 feet, it seems like your land use is pretty much curtailed anyway.
I agree, the people's land use is curtailed, but they can clear the trees typically because that would interfere with the use of the power lines. But I don't know they would have a right to put up, you know, a different, you know, income producing property just because they want it.
Yeah, but it seems like a good location, and they could compensate the landowner.
Agreed,
you know,
yeah.
Just like wind turbines on a farm, you know?
Yeah, it seems like a perfect idea because you'd have the transmission right there to connect into the grid. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the practical, you know, somebody, you have to get an agreement with either the landowner or the municipality to grant you a further easement or something, or further.
Yeah, well, I know there's
Even
a lot
if they
of
would
those
start
kind
by
of
mounting on the
agreements.
towers, that would be something. You know, they could mount right on the towers themselves, and they wouldn't be interfering with the landowner at all at that point. And then
No,
they
wouldn't
they
be
could
enough.
ease into it. You know.
Yeah.
Well, I know that when they put out ads like for farmers, because I've seen them in farm and dairy and the like, saying, if you have a high-speed transmission line going through your property, we want to talk to you for solar and wind leases. And so already they're saying that the high speed, the high voltage transmission lines need to be accessible. So, I mean, it just makes sense to follow the line, because you're not going to need the whole line. You're going to find agreeable players along that route who will provide you enough space to put in whatever you need. But, yeah. Bill, write your congressman, write your senator. Well, you're in Texas, don't worry, they won't listen. All right, teach your congressman how to read, then write them. And,
The farms
comment.
seem like a really obvious place for me because they've got acres and acres of rooftop on these buildings, and many of them already have large electrical services coming to them. And like you mentioned, a lot of them are where the lines have been routed because of the acreage they have. So it just seems like the farms are really missing out here that
Yeah.
don't have their barn roofs covered in something. I mean, they've got metal roofs already, so.
Yep. Well, we talked a little bit, I think it was last week or the week before, about agrarian solar. And there is some movement out there to raise up the panels and spread them out a bit so that you can grow crops or graze animals on large utility scale systems. I think at some point, we need to be cautious, because there's, in my mind, two separate issues. One is generating enough power for your own consumption. So for farms, for residents, for commercial buildings, usually their roof space, as you mentioned there, Ben, is plenty for their own needs. But then there's the utility scale or community solar, where you're taking and providing it for other people to sell as power purchase agreements or whatever. And I just wonder that there is not a limit at some future point to the amount of solar in those utility scale systems that will be required. We're nowhere near that limit yet, but again, at some point, we will reach a saturation. Now, if we go with the electrify everything idea and we begin to take the transportation and electrify it, the industry and electrify it, then basically we can triple our current electrical demand just by transitioning from petroleum and natural gas. And of course, within the electrical grid, we're only in a tiny fraction of renewables, about 20%. So I'm saying we're probably 50 years off before we start hitting that saturation point. But it is a point we should be conscious of now, and why not do something right from the beginning instead of keep doing it until we're in a problem situation.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to add? Jay, you've got something?
A question that A, you may have done on a day when I wasn't here, and B, probably won't fit right now if it's a topic, but historically, there was a bias against people that lived in cities and apartments. And I think that kind of living has become much more accepted. As we go to electric cars, all of a sudden there's going to be a double standard and they're going to be second-rate citizens because it's real easy. We've got a 220 line that if we wanted to, we could upgrade the hose part to make feed a really Tesla. But for my Leaf and Volt, I don't think a person living in an apartment is going to have, even if they have parking places, they'd have to completely rewire, and they don't really have access to their own electricity. And if they're going to have to deal with both the inconvenience and the cost of commercial charging stations, that's a real bias against that set of people. How are we going to deal with, is anybody proposing something to blunt that disequilibrium?
Wouldn't those be perfect people, Jay, for your rental car, you're sharing your cars? They share their, they share a building for a house already. They could share their cars.
Yeah, obviously that would be part of a transition, but let's assume everybody wants to own their own vehicle. And let's assume, as Jay is saying, that we want to transition to electric. Then obviously there would be an infrastructure cost in putting a charging station, because you're going to need basically a 60 amp outlet if you're going to go with the level 2 charging station, a 240 60 amp in each of these locations. You could just go with a 20 amp for the level 1 charging. But either way, but that seems to me that there's a motivation from the apartment owner, if he could set it up with these charging stations, and you can use these charging stations under the assumption that I can then draw from your vehicles in case of a power outage, or for powering my common areas, things of that nature. So it's a reciprocal agreement. You agree by plugging in here that there are certain things I'm allowed to do. Maybe it's power conditioning. That's another big issue. If you have notoriously dirty power coming in, bad frequencies, bad voltage variations or whatever, you can run them through a battery and clean up your power on the way out. So you can basically be conditioning your power. You can deal like with commercial billing, where if you've got a demand charge, where you've got a big motor that runs and it kicks your power usage up for a 15-minute period over the course of the month, that can significantly impact your monthly bill. If I can use your car to load level to get me through that high demand charge period, I can greatly reduce my commercial power bill without really impacting you. It's basically, I just draw the power from that from your car for that half-hour period when I've got high load demand, and then I recharge it. You may never even notice it happen. But all of those are still in the future, because we have to have an agreement with the auto manufacturers that bidirectional charge discharge does not affect the warranty of the vehicle. Because if you go out and buy a Leaf or something and then plug it in and they start discharging and your warranty's now voided, that's not good, so.
Yes.
Yep.
Does warranties cover that now, Jay, or?
No, he's gonna get it. No.
Oops, I'm gonna mute. Yeah, warranties, some do. The Nissan is, I think, the only, it seemed to me there was one other that agreed to the protocol.
Okay.
So the Nissan Leaf is agreed to it. I think there's one other manufacturer, I don't remember who it is, but
What do you mean agreed to it? I have a Leaf.
Yeah, there's an industry standards body that's developing the standard for the charging stations and discharging stations. And the manufacturers have to buy into it. They have to say, our vehicle will adhere to, ANSI standard, whatever. And when they do that, then the charge discharge cycle becomes kind of a moot issue. Sort of like inverters adhering to UL 1741 SA, as long as they can plug, put on there that this thing complies. So that's what your vehicle. And there's another issue, which it's funny, I was just doing some research on the plug standards for the chargers. Tesla's got one model. The rest of the Japanese-based ones have another. The German manufactured vehicles have another one. And there's basically not uniformity. So some of the commercial systems have to have a couple of different plugs, on their charging stations. So there is some discussion, can we get to universal charging plug? So
Jay,
we'll wait
is it driven by, if you go to Europe or Japan, they have different plugs for their regular electrical appliances. Is it driven by that, or is it just they just came up with different ones as they were going along?
Yeah, it seems to be, the same old, we just want to be different for the sake of being different, maybe. I think it struck me that the early days, what evolved into the type 1 plug, it was in the beginning designed to be the universal unit, and it was sort of adopted by all the Japanese manufacturers. But then I think Tesla adopted the German version, And since Tesla dominates American electrical vehicles, you know, but so I think it was just that they weren't wanting to be on the same page, you know, that,
Okay.
and there's probably some engineering advantages, one over the other, you know. The
Mhm.
first one that gets developed, maybe the second one that comes along has some sort of advantage, you know. It's like, oh, if we do it this way, we can do something a little bit different. Now we just need to somehow get them all. Yeah, Bill?
I think as the amps and slash watts go up, there's a limit to the amps that can go through a J1772, for example.
Okay,
Chatamo is a, but the most recent is called CCS. And I suspect that it's at least in the public charge stations, that it's the amount of amps that can go through a nozzle. Yeah.
uh-huh, could be. Yeah, I don't, I did the research, but nobody wanted to tell me why. It's just that there are a bunch of different variations and who knows, maybe we'll come to a universal plug. Although, you know, the USB jack was supposed to be a universal plug and I've got 3 different sizes for all the different phones and stuff. So the USB, the universal serial bus is not universal. So everybody's got their own little reasons. Oh, it struck me. Anyway, it went out of my mind. All right, anybody else have anything else before we call it a day? All right, well, we'll see you all next Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.